欢迎来到晨读时间，我是财经作家吴晨，经济学人商论的原总编辑。我们正处在一个巨变的时代，外部地缘政治的板块碰撞，推动全球化的转向，而内部经济的发展需要寻找新的动能，解决结构性的问题。高科技的高歌猛进，也让我们每一个人和每一个企业家都深切地意识到，你只有不断地奔跑，才能够待在原地。本期节目是吴晨商业观察对话系列的直播录音，是一期全英文的播客。我邀请到经济学人的副总编 standage 一起从对特朗普的第二任期的预测开始聊起，到 AI 的技术发展的趋势，从全球的视角一起回顾2024前瞻2025。
Welcome to the dialogue series. Today I'm very pleased to have my former colleague, the deputy editor of The Economist, and also the editor of World Ahead 2025, standage, to join us. Of course, as we are approaching the end of the year, it's very important for us to pick Tom's brains help us to forecast the future. And I really appreciate, I think, you've done a fantastic job because Trump is being elected on November 5th, and the deadline for World Ahead is like 2 weeks away. Do you have like two versions? Like if Trump is elected, we will forecast the world in scenario A, and if Kamala Harris elected, we'll have a scenario B. Do you have two plans?
Well, sort of. Yes, it's been a difficult year because so much depended on the result of the election. And also we were very worried that we wouldn't get a clear result. So it was great that we got a result very quickly. And we then had 10 days to adjust and update. And so some of my colleagues had written their articles assuming that Trump would win. I think about 2/3 of the people who had to make that call that Trump would win. But some of them wrote pieces assuming that Kamala Harris would win. And in some cases, people wrote two versions. And they said, if Trump wins, use this. And if Kamala wins, use this. But then, of course, even when we had the result, we had to go back and, we had some extra details about some of the promises he had made, some of the people he was appointing. We had some of the first appointments before we went to press. So we still had quite a lot of updating to do. And then the other thing is, just from a language point of view, and you will appreciate this, it turns out that even when you're trying to write in the future as if it's after the election, it's really difficult not to make a few slips and to write in a conditional way when in fact you and you're hoping that it reads like you know the answer, but actually you're writing in this kind of Trump would do this and that kind of stuff, and when it should say Trump will do this or Trump says he'll, so we actually had to go back over the pieces, even the pieces that were assuming a Trump victory. And not just update them, but make sure that the language didn't read like it was a speculative piece from before the election result. So that made it particularly difficult. And I think the other weird challenge about this is that we've had this whole year of 2024 of not knowing whether we would have Trump back in the White House in 2025 or Kamala Harris or someone else, basically, because it could have been Joe Biden. And so you would have thought that the result sort of takes away the uncertainty of 2025. But in fact, the fact that Donald Trump has won means the uncertainty is even greater because we have no idea what he's going to do. He has said he's going to do all of these things, and we know that Donald Trump says a lot of things. He tries out a lot of ideas. He likes to use threats and bluster and all this sort of stuff. So and our lesson from the first Trump presidency is you have to look at what he does and not what he says. And so that's the big problem with trying to work out what's going to happen once he comes back into office, which is that he's said he's going to do all sorts of things, and he'll probably do some version of some of them, but we just don't know which ones. And so that makes the outlook in politics, in trade, in lots of areas really hard to anticipate.
But have you tried? We are in an AI age. AI must have been a great help in terms of like changing wood to will. That may be an easy tweak, but have you go back to the archives of the Economist coverage of Trump years in the 2016 to onwards to 2020, and kind of try to understand in terms of what he said, what he's done, do we have a scorecard, and in terms of how do we predict his unpredictability and then apply that for us to
that's an interesting idea.
Trump.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea, to try and use AI and sort of say, here's what he said and here's what he did, and now here's what he said this time. What might he do? Yeah, I would be interested in trying that experiment. I mean, I have to say, we are not using AI to produce, core journalism at The Economist. We use AI to produce a bunch of sort of essentially versions of our core journalism in different formats. So we use it for text to speech, we use it for translation, we use it to transcribe podcasts. So we're using it to make essentially our journalism accessible in new ways, but we're not using it to do the writing. We're not using it to do the editing. So, and in fact, I first fooled around with all of this when we were writing the World Ahead 2020 edition. So in 2019,
like GPT-2, right?
Yeah, GPT-2 had come out, exactly. So I did an interview with GPT-2, and it was the only place in the World Ahead 2020 where we had a forecast that Trump would lose. We didn't really have a strong forecast on, because it was, again, it was a 50-50 election, and it ended up, that election was extremely close. 40,000 votes would have changed the outcome. But GPT-2, I said, what's going to happen, and GPT-2 confidently said, Donald Trump will lose the election. And so that was my first use of sort of AI in a quite a humorous way. I mean, we said this is an interview with an AI, and it was only trained with data up to like April of 2019. So
I recall we actually included that in the GBR. The GBR.
Oh, brilliant!
One of the first interview was ChatGPT. But going back to Trump 2.0. Going back to Trump 2.0, I think this is an area where I see China, people in China pays close attention, because this week we have Trump promising that he will deliver 10% trade tariff on China, 25% to Canada and Mexico, and we bet there are many things to come. So I want you to focus on two things that it's being forecasted in World Ahead 2025. So A, how do we deal with tariffs? How real would Trump apply these tariffs? And then looking at all the lineup, all the major important recommendations for the cabinets, there are one side of the cabinets who like to use tariffs as a means to force other people to make change behavior. And of course, there are other camps which would see tariffs as an end. So which side do you think would win over, and how do we deal with a world where tariffs will be the keywords for international trade?
Yeah, no, it's very tough. And I think it's not just on tariffs, on a lot of things. China, on China policy, on the Middle East, on all sorts of things, on Ukraine. What we see with Trump is he has a very wide range of opinions. The cabinet is actually very ideologically diverse. But there are some really quite left-wing people in there. I mean, RFK, if you look at him, he agrees with Bernie Sanders on quite a lot of things. He thinks corporations are evil. I mean, he thinks vaccines are a scam, sort of perpetuated by pharmaceutical companies. So and what that means, so what geopolitical analysts say is, when you look at the advisors around a person, if you have a wide range, a wide spectrum of advisors, that means that the possible range of outcomes is also very wide, and that makes it very, very hard to predict what someone's going to do. And we know that Donald Trump tends to sort of talk to lots of people, and then when he feels, he does whatever the last person he spoke to suggests, but he also sort of keeps talking to people until he finds someone who basically tells him to do what he wants to do already, what his gut is telling him to do, and then he goes, yes, that makes me feel it's the right thing. So it's really hard to say. On tariffs, you're right, there are two schools of thought here. One school of thought is that this is just a negotiating ploy, and you see quite a lot of backers for Trump in the business world, and it's weird because they obviously they believe him on the parts of his agenda that he says he's going to cut taxes, he's going to deregulate, and the business community loves the sound of that. But then they must believe him on those parts of his agenda, but not believe him on the tariffs, because the tariffs would be terrible. They would be terrible for American business. They would be terrible for
inflation.
Right, it'd be terrible for inflation, because they're really a sales tax on American consumers. And Trump, he seems not to get that. He seems to think that if you put tariffs on China, China pays the tariffs, and that's not how it works. American consumers pay the tariffs, and so but anyway, it may be that he's only persuaded of that if he actually tries it and sees the impact of it. But yes, I mean it's weird because the business community seems to be saying we believe him when he says he's going to cut taxes and deregulate, but we don't think he's serious about the tariffs. And if you look at what's happened when he made this threat to put 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico, now the impact on Canada and Mexico would be really dramatic because they are in this free trade area, the USMCA, US Mexico Canada free trade area, which was set up by Donald Trump as the replacement for NAFTA. And so Mexico and Canada are very integrated with the US economy. Something like 80% of their exports go to the US. That's a very different situation from China, which I think sends about 15% of its exports to America. So China could find other markets. But if you are a company that has really integrated supply chains between Mexico and the US or Canada and the US, and there are lots of companies that do in things like automotive and so on, this is a real, sand in the gears. This would be terrible. And so Trump makes this threat, almost 2 months before he's coming into office. And then he says he's spoken to the president of Mexico and that she has agreed to seal the border. So there won't be any more migrants coming into America from Mexico. And they had a very good conversation. She then immediately says, no, that's not what I said. And so, so if you look at all of that kind of thing, it does look like a negotiating ploy because he's doing so far in advance. He's trying to get concessions, So that strengthens the case that, excuse me, so that strengthens the case that he is using this as a ploy. On the other hand, he does really seem to want to do something like this. So I suspect what he'll do is it won't be 60% import tariffs on Chinese goods. It will be, he'll start with some lower amount to show that he means it and threaten to raise it and then use that as so I think there'll be something in the middle. I think there will be some tariffs. And of course he did impose a whole bunch in his first term on China's, on America's allies, as well. So European goods, and quite a lot of those are still in place, and Joe Biden extended some of them. So we are already in a world of quite a lot of tariffs. The difference is that he's talking about these blanket tariffs where absolutely everything, rather than very, very specific goods, are affected. And that's a very different situation. Last time America introduced blanket tariffs on this scale, of the kind of scale he's talking about, was the Smoot-Hawley tariffs in 1930, and that had a devastating effect on world trade. World trade fell
like 100 years ago.
Exactly. And that is now a kind of a byword for disastrous economic policy making. The other thing about the tariffs that we have to remember is that the first time around in the first Trump presidency, yes, he introduced various tariffs, in particular on goods coming from China, but he then made a lot of exceptions to them. And one of the exceptions was Apple. And Apple obviously has, it depends on China for its manufacturing and for its supply chain. And Tim Cook seems to have played the game very, very well. So we are like,
he called him like every week, right?
Yes, exactly. I mean, honestly, I whenever I'm asked who is a master diplomat in the business world, I say it's Tim Cook. I mean, look at what he did. He managed to he takes, as a company, Apple has taken very progressive positions, but at the same time he manages to stay friends with Donald Trump and protect Apple's business because he gets an exception to the tariffs. So I think we're going to see the same thing again, which is that Trump will put on these tariffs, scare everybody, try to negotiate. At the same time, he's going to cut deals with some countries, some companies, people who ring him up and offer him favors, people who flatter him, people who give him things that he likes, or take him to football games, or who knows what it's going to be. But he's going to make exceptions, and this is going to be, and this is a broader theme for the whole Trump presidency, because it's how Trump works. He's very, very transactional, and he doesn't really have sort of high principles. He's just saying, look, this is a bad deal, so let's make a different deal, and then he's going to cut side deals, and that's just the way he operates. And he's going to do that with tariffs, and he's probably going to do it in geopolitics as well.
But do you think there are hardliners within the upcoming Trump administration who would have a very hard stand on China, not only goods made in China, but also because the trend in the last 2 years is that Chinese manufacturers are moving outside China because in anticipation that goods made in China will face higher tariffs, so they go to Vietnam, Mexico is a big place for Chinese manufacturers and Europe. But do you think the team would be meticulous enough so that they would target all these manufacturers who are Chinese but who are doing the business outside China? I mean, because that would be a whole change or the damage to the overall global supply chain.
No, absolutely. I mean, the China going global strategy is very smart. It makes total sense because you have Chinese companies setting up inside the trade zones. So in Hungary, within the EU, and then within Mexico in particular. And Trump is already onto this, and he says that he wants to have even high. I think he was talking about 200% tariffs on EVs made in factories in Mexico, because a lot of Chinese companies are setting up factories specifically to make EVs, which makes total sense because Mexico is already very
they have a big supply chain of auto sectors. So
exactly. So it's totally logical, and of course that's inside this North American trade zone, which Donald Trump himself set up, the USMCA. So but he's now saying, well, that's not fair. So yeah, this is the whole thing. He's going to change the rules all the time, and he is going to make he's going to have different rules for specific different companies. I mean, he originally he had the chip ban only applied to Huawei and ZTE under Trump, and then I think Joe Biden extended it to to block the exports of chips in general to like all Chinese companies. But Trump started off with that very specific, I don't like Huawei and I don't like ZTE, so I'm going to clobber them. So yeah, he is going to pick on specific companies. It's not just Chinese companies. Remember he picked on Harley Davidson as well, the motorbike company. He went after, I think, Scotch whiskey and Parmesan cheese. I mean, it's very random, and this is the lesson from the first Trump presidency was that if a CEO said something that Trump didn't like, he would like go after them, and so everyone is sort of going to keep their heads down, right? They're not going to speak out and say, well, we're very worried.
Bezos was being targeted for all the shipping using U.S. hosts,
right, exactly, and Bezos, this is one of the worrying things that people are saying that even before Trump won, that business people were starting to self-censor themselves, and famously Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, told them not to endorse a particular political candidate. So he seemed to be trying to protect himself against the vengeance of Trump if Trump won.
It's like a hedging strategy for him.
It is totally. But this is what people say, that the most dangerous thing about a society where you're worried about is that people censor themselves. It's not not worrying about government censure. Anyway, so I think lots of companies are going to be treading very carefully. They're going to be ringing up Donald Trump and saying, we're your friend, and please don't clobber us, and that's going to make it very, very hard to see what's happening. But yeah, this on the supply chain side, I mean, I was talking to some executives from the aviation industry this week, and they were saying they have seen a huge surge in demand to ship components to America to basically get stockpile stuff inside America before Trump gets into office, so that they've got a few months of flexibility before they have to adapt to whatever the new system is.
But that's just that's just how much you could prepare for. It's like Huawei in anticipation for all these crackdown on chips. They stockpile a year of chips, but the chips would run out at the end of the day. You have to adapt to the new reality.
It gives you longer to adapt. I mean, I agree. I mean, obviously, and obviously, what we've seen is that Huawei has then, it had its year of chips, and then it's really stepped up its efforts to develop its own chips, and it's done some very impressive. Given that it hasn't got access to the latest EUV machines, it's quite impressive what they've managed to do with it's SMIC that they work with, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, going back to the Trump's, all these advisors, Musk, which is also a household name in China, is prominent with his DOGE, the Department of Efficiency. And how long do you think his bromance with Trump would last? And what kind of a role do you think he would play within the Trump administration in terms of really driving innovation, cutting down the bureaucracy, and also drive deregulation. But on the other hand, he has a big business interest in China with the Tesla plant. What kind of role do you think he would play in terms of being an intermediary between US and China?
Exactly. So the whole Musk situation is very, very interesting and very unpredictable because, yes, Musk is he's likely to be more sort of dovish on relations with China because of his own business interests, whereas there are other people talking to Trump who will say, no, you need to be really tough on China. And then the other example of this is on, say, AI regulation. There's a bunch of people talking to Trump, but and you have this spectrum. But the weird thing about Musk is he is on both sides of the spectrum at the same time when it comes to AI. He's one of the people who has talked the most about the danger of unregulated AI and how it could, like, he calls it summoning the demon, and he's very worried about AI safety. At the same time, he's got his own AI company now, XAI, which I think is worth, it's worth much more than Twitter now. And that company, he has set it up because he says the problem with all of the other AI language models that the other American companies are producing is that they're too woke. And he says the problem is that, we really need an unregulated chatbot that is prepared to basically say unacceptable things because otherwise it's too woke and you're getting these very kind of mealy-mouthed, lily-livered answers. So he's in favor of regulation and deregulation at the same time on AI. So it's very hard to know. Anyway, so on the broader question of deregulation, I think there are two possible ways this could go, and we don't know which Musk we're going to get. Are we going to get SpaceX Musk, or are we going to get Twitter Musk? So SpaceX is famously a very, very innovative and well-run company. Now, interestingly, it's the company that's not really run by Elon Musk. It's really run by Gwynne Shotwell, and it is a company that has done the impossible. It has built rockets that can land, which NASA said you could never do, and it now it's developing this new Starship rocket, the biggest rocket ever. But most importantly, SpaceX with its Falcon rockets is launching more into space than everyone else in the world put together. It's the most efficient, the best run. And NASA, meanwhile, has this terrible rocket called SLS, which costs like $2 billion every time they launch it. So it's almost 100 times more expensive. That's about right, isn't it?
At least 10 times. Yeah,
it's like 50 to 100 times. So in other words, SpaceX is an example of how the private sector can move much faster and be much more efficient and much less bureaucratic than the public sector. And the contrast between SpaceX and NASA is just huge. I mean, it's unbelievable.
It's like he's delivering what he promises. He's building a Honda Accord versus the luxury car.
Right, exactly. But it's not even, I mean, it's actually better. I mean, it's I think it's, it's and also cars is so weird. It was someone said the other day, if you can buy a BYD car and it's as quiet as a Rolls Royce and it's as fast as a Ferrari and it's as reliable as a Mercedes, then but it costs $20,000, then what is a luxury car anymore? I mean, it's anyway. So, but that's another story. Anyway, going back to this, so the sort of good outcome is that we get the kind of SpaceX efficiency and cost cutting and getting rid of bureaucracy approach applied to the US government. The bad outcome is the Twitter approach, where he took over Twitter. Musk went into Twitter and he immediately fired about 3/4 of the staff. And everyone said, "Oh, this is going to break Twitter. It's going to fall over. It's going to stop working." Actually, it did keep going, and it's had a lot of other problems. I mean, advertisers have run away, and they got rid of the content moderation team and just said, say whatever you like. So disinformation has been flourishing. I mean, so there's a bunch of other problems. But if you just look at the sort of technical basis of the platform, it has kept running. And so this led to a lot of people in Silicon Valley saying, well, hang on a minute, maybe we could be running our operations much more leanly. Maybe we don't need so many people. And Musk is prepared to do these quite bold things. And so but they do have consequences. So the concern is that he would try that kind of approach with the US government. We have to remember that Doge, the terribly named department that he's running, which is, of course, is named after the Doge meme. It's just classic.
The coin,
well, the coin is named after the dog Doge. The Doge memes from whenever it was a few years ago. This is a classic Elon Musk dad joke. He loves these kinds of terrible jokes. But that department has no official status because it's not a department of the government, because Musk cannot be made an official government, official, because he would have to give up his company. I mean, he wouldn't. I mean, Donald Trump's not going to give up any of his companies because he doesn't. I think the rules apply to him. But in order to basically allow Musk not to have to pretend that he's not running his companies anymore, they have made this Doge thing an advisory body, and that means it has no official standing. And so he can say you should do this and you should do that, but whether any of it will actually happen or not, we don't know. The other thing on Musk, finally, is you asked about the relationship with Trump, and we talk about a bromance, and we talk about they both want to be the stronger, the alpha male. I was talking to some colleagues in the office about this the other day, and one of them had just spoken to people inside the Trump circle about this, and the theory that was circulating is that actually this is not that kind of their drinking buddies kind of relationship. It's a father-son relationship. So Musk is famously
Trump the father,
Trump is the father,
Musk the son.
Because Trump, for Trump, Elon Musk is the son he wishes he had, right? Elon Musk is super smart. He's changed the world. He's a titan in business. He's a genuine billionaire. He's in fact a third of the way to being a trillionaire. And if anyone's going to be a trillionaire, it's going to be him. So he is as far as Donald Trump is concerned, he is, he's a big success. And we know how much Donald Trump cares about big numbers and being famous and all that kind of stuff. So Elon, and he's a celebrity. And and whereas if you look at Donald Trump's actual sons, they are not the sharpest tools in the toolkit, right? I mean, Barron is the interesting one, because you talked about the there's this whole question of
the podcast, because Barron brought all these podcasts to him.
Exactly. So Barron is actually of the three of them, Barron is the one who's looking like the smart one. Anyway, but so from Trump's point of view, Elon is the son that he wishes he had, and from Elon's point of view, Elon is famously estranged from his father, kind of ran away from South Africa to get away from him, and has now become the richest person in the world, and yet his father seems still isn't impressed by this, and so what does Elon have to do to impress his dad? Obviously nothing is enough, whereas Donald Trump loves him and says this is great. So Trump is like the father he never had, the father who recognizes his intellectual and commercial prowess and so on. So you can, that's a very different dynamic from rivalry and like who's top dog here. And so that may mean, I mean, it could still all blow up at any time, but that may mean that it's actually going to last a bit longer than you might think.
So we're talking about a different version of succession.
Yeah, we are. It's terrifying. And the thing we have to remember is that Musk, so Musk now looks like the heir, but he can't be president, right? He can't.
Yeah, he's not. He's born in South Africa, exactly. So he's not.
So Arnold Schwarzenegger, when he was the governor of California, he used to open his speeches with the same joke a lot of the time. So typically when he was speaking at a big event, he would ride into the hall on the motorbike from Terminator 2. And he would roar in with the sunglasses and the music playing. He would go up onto the stage and he would say, "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for changing the Constitution, and I accept the nomination to be the Republican candidate for." And then he'd say, "Oh, sorry, wrong speech," and then he would make the speech that he actually. So this was the joke that he was saying, if you change the Constitution, maybe I would run, and so who knows?
And then there's a possibility that Trump may be able to change the Constitution.
The big question is he going to try and stay on in 2028? And I wouldn't be at all surprised if he did, because he's already talked about it a lot, and he says whatever comes into his mind. But he's also said that he's going to have the 2020 election investigated. He's going to have the FBI look into it, and I'm sure they're going to find whatever he tells them to find, which is, there was definitely lots of funny business. And he's talked in the past about how the right compensation for having that election stolen from him, which is what he thinks happened,
would be another term.
Right, exactly. Well, at least it's what he pretends he thinks happened. He has on various occasions he's admitted that he lost. He says things like he apparently he said to one of his aides, "Can you believe I lost to that guy, to Biden?" And he's talked about in interviews how he lost by a whisker. So he seems to acknowledge at times that he did actually lose, but then at other times he says, "No, it was all a scam." Anyway, so he'll have the FBI find that it was stolen, and then he'll say, "I therefore am owed another term in compensation," and also, who's going to stop him, right? I mean, the Supreme Court.
But by the time he will be too old, like 82, 83 years old, right?
I know. This is assuming he's still alive, because who knows?
He's still alive,
with people that, I mean, he's the oldest president who's ever been elected. So Biden is older. Biden is 82 now, but Trump is 78 and will actually be older than Biden is now by the end of the term.
Well,
yeah.
I just want to jump in one thing. How about J.D. Vance? Because J.D. Vance also seems to be a son to Trump.
Sort of. I mean, Trump was. So it was Don Jr. who kind of really pushed Trump to go with Vance, and Vance looks like the sort of on paper he is a very obvious heir to the MAGA, movement. And also he can the thing he can really do that I think no one else can do is he can put sort of intellectual flesh on the MAGA bones. I mean, the MAGA philosophy, there isn't really a coherent philosophy. It's a mixture of lots of different things. It's very sort of pro-worker. It's very unconservative and really a deviation from sort of traditional Republican views. But it has this quite broad support of sort of standing up for the common man. And what Vance is able to do is sort of turn that into what sounds more like a coherent intellectual policy platform. So logically, he's the right person. But I get the sense that Trump had buyer's remorse almost immediately after appointing him, and he's very unpopular even among the MAGA crowd. People think he's a phony, and he kind of is. I mean, he started off as a critic of Trump and then switched, and he's not. A lot of the things he says he is are, if you look closely, I don't know. He's a strange character. So he certainly hasn't got the charisma and the sort of the charm and the appeal that Trump has, at least for a lot of people. I have to say, you can't argue with his. I don't find him charming myself, but a lot of people like it, and they think he's funny and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's hard to see how. It'd be interesting to see in this term, because also vice presidents, it's the worst job in politics, right? You don't have to. You get given some insoluble problem.
He has to bide his time, and he seems to be on good terms with Musk. So who knows, right?
Well, exactly. That's where I think there's more likely to be a fallout and tension. That Don Jr., Musk, and Vance are all going to be competing for daddy.
Who's going to be the favorite son?
Yeah, right. So I think that's where there's that's where there's a lot of, and if it turns out that Vance and Musk end up being the puppet masters or whatever, and sort of whispering in Trump's ear, then maybe they could be quite a formidable team together. But yeah, the personal dynamics. This is what makes it also difficult, that the personal dynamics are absolutely critical to how the policies play out. And this is a very strange situation to be in. Normally, a politician says these are my policies, and you can look at their track record, you can see what they believe. You can't really you can sort of do that with Donald Trump, but he's talked about doing such radical things in his term, deporting people and the big tariffs and ending the war in Ukraine in a day and all this kind of stuff, that it's very, very hard to see where it's going to go. And it is going to come down to personalities and the people around him.
And on Ukraine, I think this is also a very important topic. The world look forward. I think at this stage, the whole mentality is that it's being a prolonged war. Both sides have suffered too much.
Yeah,
it's time for us to end the war, but we should end in a good term. Means that Ukraine may have to lose some land, but their future security should be guaranteed. Do you think Trump is the person to be able to deliver that?
That's the big question. It's obvious that the shape of the deal is a land for peace deal, right? And it is that Russia gets to keep basically a fifth of Ukraine, And the problem is that I mean they've got more of it than they had, you know, in 2022. They started grabbing bits of it in 2014. The difficulty for Ukraine, this is a terrible deal, but they also want the fighting to stop, and a majority of people in Ukraine are now saying we should do a deal. So the big question comes down to the security guarantees. Would America give Ukraine security guarantees? Obviously, what Ukraine would really like is membership of NATO, but that seems very unlikely. But if America said we will support you, and if Russia tries to do anything again, then we will, you know, either ourselves or we will back our NATO allies in supporting you. And what you would then have is a environment in which Ukraine could you would have a sort of East Germany, West Germany situation, or North Korea, South Korea, where the free capitalist, open, westernized part of the country is able to thrive, turn towards Europe, build relationships, become much richer than the Russian-controlled part of the country. This, of course, and then basically be an example to the other side of the country that this is what you could have if and when we reunify the country. And this is what happened with Germany, obviously. And of course, that's exactly what Putin. That's a Freudian slip. That's exactly what Putin was trying to prevent. The reason he invaded Ukraine in the first place is that the existence of Ukraine as a thriving European democracy would be a direct riposte to Russia in the same way that Poland is, right? These are both countries that were part of the Soviet Union, and they are now, you know, in Poland's case, Poland is a thriving European democracy, and that suggests that Russia could be the same. And for people in Russia, it's like, wouldn't you rather be like this? You know, Poland is a booming. I mean, its rate of growth has been absolutely astonishing. It was the only country in Europe that avoided a recession during the global financial crisis. In Britain, the famous story is we had lots of people when we were part of the EU. Lots of people from Poland came over to work in Britain, famously plumbers. So the sort of stereotype was the Polish plumber. And then what happened was actually the Polish plumbers went back to Poland because
they're heading back. Okay, they have more opportunities.
Poland was growing much faster than Britain. I mean, Britain has been economically stagnant for 15 years, but Poland is absolutely booming. And in fact, Poland is now sort of used as an example of how quickly countries can democratize and modernize and grow. And its growth rates are compared with other European countries, but also with Russia. And anyway, so the good scenario for Ukraine is that the best scenario is that it gets security guarantees. This would also mean that America would be taken seriously when it says it's going to back its allies in other parts of the world, because everybody wants to know, both friends and foes alike, wants to know whether America is serious about its alliances. And we don't know how solid its commitments to its alliances are. And, Trump he could very easily undermine NATO just by saying, if Putin tries something after the inauguration, if a military helicopter from Latvia or Lithuania goes missing over the Baltic Sea, and maybe the Russians shot it down, this kind of scenario, and Russia says, oh, nothing to do with us, but there's evidence that there's been meddling. If there's some kind of provocative act like that, and you can just imagine Donald Trump saying, oh, Latvia, I've never even heard of it, or Lithuania, who the hell knows where that country even is, and then that's the end of NATO Article 5, because and suddenly it's America's commitment is, and he said the same about South Korea, right? So it's an ally of America, but he's like, South Korea, are they paying us for our protection? And he was quite surprised to discover that South Korea is not paying a kind of mafia protection fee. So this is how he thinks about things, and so it really could go either way, because if America provides security guarantees, presumably in conjunction with European allies, that would enhance the credibility of Trump and of America. But if it doesn't, then that's a victory to Vladimir Putin, and it's a red light. Sorry, it's a green light to countries around the world who want to meddle and invade their neighbors and do whatever they want to do, that Trump isn't going to mind. So that's going to be the first really key test, I think, of what the new foreign policy looks like right at the start of 2025.
And in terms of Ukraine, do you think which is more important, NATO possibility to join NATO or having NATO guarantee of security, or as you said, it could be an East-West Germany scenario where if admission into EU and being part of integrated European market, and also having pressure because Ukraine at the end of the day is not a full-blown democracy yet. There are still many other things.
Exactly.
It needs a lot of kind of engineer construction and changes to its bureaucracy, to its democracy, to make it fully bloom. So which one is more important? I think after 3 or 4 years of war, going back to economic development, I think that's what people wanted to do.
No, I think that's true. So, but I think it's not really. I mean, NATO membership, I don't think is feasible because I mean, even NATO's own rules say you can't join NATO if part of your country is under occupation or if you're in a war, right? Because otherwise you're joining a club that promises to protect you if you get into a fight while you're already in a fight. So so I don't think NATO membership. I know that the promise of eventual NATO membership is the kind of thing that is being talked about on the EU side. So I think probably promises from NATO that we would defend you even though you're not a member is the kind of thing that Ukraine is after. On the EU side of things, the EU is very big and getting very difficult to manage. With the current voting system means that it's very hard to reach a consensus. And there's a sort of queue of 8 or 9 countries that want to join the EU next. And the old rules were that you had to align with EU standards on governance and on economic indicators and this sort of stuff, and then you could be let in if you meet all these criteria. That is looking harder and harder for these next generation of entrant countries to do. And simultaneously we have the situation with Britain, where Britain has left the EU but is going to be cooperating more and more with European partners on defence and wants to start rebuilding. So I think where we may see the EU going, and it's a sort of extension of where we already are, is a multi-speed sort of a la carte Europe. And we already have a multi-speed Europe because some of the members of the EU are in the Eurozone and some of them are not. But what is being talked about for some of those new members who are mostly in the Balkans, Eastern Europe, that sort of thing, is that they would be given some benefits of EU membership in return for some reforms before they become full members. So in other words, there'd be a sort of on-ramp to Europe, to European membership, where you would say, look, we have reformed, this, this, and this, and Europe would say, great, you can now have conditional access to the customs union or the single market or whatever, or we could give you preferential trade terms. And so you have this kind of gradual entry closer and closer to the EU. And this, I think, Britain would take, some kind of deal like that, and that's the sort of thing that we may see next year, a deal on food imports and exports. So if we agree. So there's a big, at the moment, we aren't aligned on what's called phytosanitary rules, which is if you're sending live animals between Britain and Europe, this kind of stuff. So so Britain would probably do something similar, but Ukraine could do the same. So Ukraine could get some of the benefits of EU membership without being a full member, and it would start to integrate, and you would have basically trade deals and more integration, and it could gradually become more integrated into the EU. And then if at some point in the future Vladimir Putin goes away and there's the possibility of reunifying Ukraine, then then the whole country can become a full member. So that's the kind of if you think about the next 10, 15, 20 years, the kind of scenario that Ukraine will be hoping to set up. So yeah, I think that's the best case outcome, and that would be good for Europe, and I think it's the best that Ukraine can hope for right now. But yeah, the security guarantees is going to be the crucial piece.
Shifting gears a little bit, AI is a big thing that in World Ahead 2020. I think 2024-5, there's a lot of coverage. I think there are 3 major questions. A, what's your forecast on the scaling law? Because I think that's like $1 trillion question. And B, of course, to what extent, when do we think we will see really visible productivity improvements? Because after 2 years, it seems as if, with all kinds of reports, we see little improvements. And 3, of course, this goes back to China, because we've talked about, under the all these tariffs and also the export control on high-tech chips, it seems as if China has built an interesting good ecosystem to nudge a kind of an independently developed ecosystem. What's your kind of overall take on that? How can China really come up with a viable alternative? So
absolutely. I think what's happening in China is very, very interesting, because it's a really classic example of how constraints drive innovation. So somebody said recently, I can't remember who it was, but it was a commentator on the Chinese AI scene, that Chinese AI companies are using computing power about 100 times more effectively than American companies, because American companies can just say, fine, we'll just buy more chips, and that's not an option in China. So there are some really impressive models that are coming out, some of the open source models. They are absolutely on a par with the best models coming out of the American companies, and they are being developed with a lot less in terms of resources. There's also some really interesting work being done on distributed training, so you can put together lots of chips in different places, just generally tuning the model so that you need less computing power when you're training. So I think actually, this is making the innovation that we're seeing coming out of China is extraordinary, and it's sort of I think the rest of the world can learn from it, because we're all trying to find ways to make AI models less resource intensive. I think China has a lot to teach the world on that front, just by virtue of not having access to the latest greatest chips. And then I think that brings us to the scaling. So it's possible for the scaling law to be breaking down and not breaking down at the same time. And the way I say that is that when people say the scaling law is breaking down, what they mean is that simply throwing more chips and more data is not giving us the same returns to scale that we were getting before. And that, I think, is undeniably true. There is no question of that. And also, we can't scale. We can throw 100%, 100 times more chips at the problem, but we don't have 100 internets, right? We've already put the whole internet into these models, and we don't have 100 more internets that we can put. So there's a lot of interesting work being done on synthetic data, on different approaches to training, and so on. And then there's also this interesting work being done where, with particularly the GPT-01 model, and this is where you get more out of the model by essentially running it for longer at inference time. So you make the model think harder about its answer. And this, if you scale at the inference step as well, then that gives you a whole new area. So it's true that sort of brute force scaling is not giving returns to scale, but that is forcing people to innovate, and so you are still going to get an improvement in the models, and you're going to get new things. So that's why I think it's true and not true at the same time. There were people who thought, and I don't think there are many of them left now, but there were people who thought that you could get to AGI, whatever that means, because that's a whole nother problem that there isn't really a single definition for it. But there were lots of people who thought that LLMs are a kind of royal road to AGI, and if you just kept throwing more chips and more data at them, the models would just get smarter and smarter and smarter, and then they would become conscious and superhuman AI and all this kind of stuff. And I always thought that was a bit weird, because why would that, bigger is just bigger and is not quantitatively, I don't know. I mean, the models were getting smarter, but that's not the same as saying that I mean, if you can make faster and faster cars, but does that mean they can eventually fly? An airplane is a different thing from a car. So the idea that we'd kind of solved AI and all we needed to do was scale it up, I don't think was ever true. And I think what's happening now is much more interesting, because the people are recognizing the limits of just scaling up the language models that we have, and they're saying, look, we need to make them multimodal. We should probably stop calling them language models, because they're really next token predictors, and the tokens can be anything. They could be language, they could be images, they could be sound, and so on. But so I think the big question for next year is, where do we see those gains? Are they still just incremental, or do we start to see breakthroughs on agent-based systems, on inference-based levels and stuff? And I think the other big...
Any new promising field that we should pay attention to in addition to large language models? Yeah.
So what's happening with robots is very interesting, because these models are being trained more and more on data from sensors, so cameras and sensors on robots, and that makes the robots much better, because you can then, because it's a multimodal model, you can talk to the robot and tell it what to do. You can change its behavior through prompting, and so that is an absolute game changer for robotics. So we're seeing really dramatic progress in robotics, but it's also good for the AI models as well, because they hallucinate less when their understanding of the world is grounded in physical reality. So that's AI makes robotics better, and robotics makes AI better. So watch out for that. And yes, I think these models that spend more time thinking about their answers, I think that's interesting too. But the broader picture here is that a huge amount of investment is going into AI, about $1.5 trillion in AI infrastructure between 2024 and 2027. And the actual take up by companies is still quite small. Only 5% of companies in America say they are using AI in production. Systems, and that's quite worrying. If you look at OpenAI, 75% of its revenue is coming from consumer subscriptions, not from business
corporates.
And so what I think that tells you is that a lot of AI is being used, but it's being used by consumers, used by employees without telling their bosses. And I think a big challenge for the adoption of AI by companies is a cultural, managerial challenge, because people are using this technology and they're getting value from it, but they don't want to admit it because they're worried about what might happen if they do. They're worried.
They worry about losing their job. They're worried that AI could.
No. Well, I don't think it's that. I think they're worried that if the boss says, "Oh, Chen, you did that report really quickly this week. That was really great. It read really well. Well done." And if you say, "Well, I used AI," then I'll say, "Oh, that's great. Well, I'm going to give you twice as much work now." And then I'm going to say, "And now will you train your whole team how to do it?" And then I can fire half of them. This is. And also, if you're delivering better work because you're using these tools, then maybe that means you get promoted, and you don't want to tell your co-workers what your secret weapon is. So you can see there are lots of incentives to use these tools without being transparent about it. And of course, there are a lot of risks about that, because it means people could be putting proprietary data into these big models and so on. Yeah. So companies really have to think about how they communicate with their employees. They need to make open environments. They need to have sandboxed versions of systems that you can play with safely. And they need to reassure people that if they actually do use this technology, it's not going to be, it's not going to, lead to bad consequences for them or their teams, that this isn't going to mean that there are job losses or whatever. So this is a really difficult needle to thread. And I think it's as I say, it's a cultural challenge, because you have to have trust. And the other thing about AI is that, most companies, you haven't hired anyone because they're good at AI, right? You've just got whoever you have, and now AI has come along. So the distribution of AI talent in your company is completely random. It could be anybody who figures out, how to make use of AI. And so you have to encourage, you have competitions and incentives, and we've built an AI system, everybody go and play with it, and send your ideas. And we actually did this at The Economist. We had an internal contest that was open to the whole company, and we had these cross-functional teams of people from all parts of the business who came up with varying ideas. I was one of the judges, but I thought that was a really exemplary way of doing this, which is to say, look, we don't know the best ways to do this, and so we want everyone to just give it a try, and we will give you prizes if you come up with things, and we will give you funding to build stuff. And this is not about trying to reduce headcount, and it's not about cost savings. It's about trying to increase productivity. And then you talked about productivity. We're not seeing this. We're not seeing this coming through in the figures.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, if productivity improvement can be delivered, it will mean that teams will be smaller. Complicated tasks could be done by a team of human and AI.
Not necessarily. It really does depend. That's the lump of labor fallacy, what you've just said there. So if you look at what happened with weaving, when weaving began to be automated, it was essentially the machines got cleverer and cleverer, and one person could produce 50 times as much cloth using machines than they could have done before the machines. So what did this mean? Did the number of people working in weaving fall by 98% because you only needed, you could produce the same amount of cloth with
you're producing like 10 times more cloth.
Right, but what actually happens, of course, is that the cost of cloth fell because you could produce it more easily, and then demand for cloth went up, and so weaving actually ended up employing more people at the end of the 19th century than it did at the beginning of the 19th century. And this is the same with AI, that if the products that you can and services you're delivering using AI, you can deliver them more cheaply, then more people may suddenly be able to buy them. If you're a law firm and you can do things more quickly using AI more cheaply, you may actually be able to sell at the moment. Employing a lawyer is expensive. Most people don't do it unless they have to do it. What if it was much cheaper and you could get legal advice really, really cheaply? I bet lots more people would do it. And this is what we see. This is what you always see with automation. It makes the overall production of a thing. Similarly, radiography. People always talk about how radiographers are going to lose their jobs to AI because AI systems seem to, be good at spotting things. Actually, what this means is that radiographers can do more. They can read more scans and get more accurate results more quickly, and that should mean that more people have access to radiography. A lot of, again, it's very expensive. A lot of people do not have access to scans and all the rest of it. Imagine if you could make radiography cheaper and easier to access in the developing world. That would be great. And so the answer is not that it's not that there's a fixed amount of radiography that needs to be done or a fixed amount of legal services. If you can make it cheaper, more people will buy it. Another example, graphic design. You would not go. Graphic design there are a lot more graphic designers in the world now than there were before desktop publishing, because the barrier to entry was suddenly much lower. So now, if you're a corner shop and you want a logo or something, you go to a graphic designer and say, make me a logo. You probably wouldn't have done that when graphic design was an expensive service that only big advertising companies could afford. So
but for everyone, the knowledge worker, you have to be prepared to use AI tools and deliver things more productively, and then get more jobs done, but in a different way.
Yes, but we know that. So East Asia has the largest number of robots, and we know that the companies that have the most robots, so like the South Korean car makers, they outcompete the other car makers. So it's not that the robots are taking jobs away from people at Hyundai, but Hyundai is basically the people who are losing out are the European car makers that are not selling as many cars because their cars are not as good and more expensive than the South Korean ones, which are made using robots. So it's not a competition between people and machines. It's competition between the people who know how to use the machines and use them to increase their productivity and the people who don't. And so that's why, whatever field you're in, you need to learn how to use these tools. You need to figure out how to integrate them with what you're doing, and that is the way forward.
Talking about auto sector, I think EVs from China. This is one thing that China has painted the hope for future economic development, but also given the overall geopolitical situation, like Chinese EVs are in a very challenging situation. If things are like in the 80s or 90s in last centuries, then Chinese EV makers can follow the footsteps of Japanese and Korean companies, be cheaper, be competitive, be innovative, then that's it. But it seems as if now they have to be learn from Tim Cook to be a good diplomats, because it's an area that they need to navigate. So what would be your advice to them?
I think the big problem is that they're too good. I have a Chinese EV right here. It's the Volvo, the one that's made by Geely. It's a fantastic car, and the Chinese EVs are just in a different league to anything that is being produced in Europe or America, because they are smartphones on wheels, and they have a lot. I mean, the Xiaomi, the SU7 is the classic example. To make an EV, you really need to understand software, and you need the skills of a consumer electronics company, because knowing how to make gearboxes and engines doesn't matter anymore. And the American and the European car makers are terrified of this. And the funny thing is that Europe has just put these 40% tariffs on Chinese EVs. Yeah. Even with a 40% tariff, the Chinese EVs are still cheaper and better. So, I mean, yeah, so it's really about the threat to the domestic industry. And I don't see how those, I think, Volkswagen is like Nokia. I don't see how it can come back from this. So we'll see. I mean,
but hiding behind the tariffs war wouldn't last long.
No, in the long term, in fact, we have argued that putting tariffs on them is the wrong thing to do, because the only way that Volkswagen can survive is if it has to compete again. It will learn how to do this, and the Western car makers will only learn how to compete if they are exposed to proper competition. But yeah, I don't think politically it's very hard to see how that's going to happen. But yes, I mean they really are amazing products, and it's interesting to see them at the sort of center of the geopolitical trade conflict, because everyone, well, not everyone recognizes, but I think a lot of people recognize that switching to EVs is something we have to do. And look, lo and behold, here are really high quality, low cost ones available, and why don't we just buy those? Anyway, I'm going to have to go. I'm afraid I have to have another meeting.
Thank you so much. I think in an hour we cover a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank
Tom,
you.
Let's catch up at a different time.
Yes. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
感谢收听本期节目，欢迎订阅、评论、转发，与我分享你的看法与观点。除此之外，获得晨读更多的信息与文章，可以关注公众号晨读书局、小红书吴晨商业观察。和我一起用商业科技新知打开更大的世界。我们下期节目很快再见。